Hey everyone, I've just finished reading The Man in the High Castle by Philip K. Dick, PKD as he's often called, who is an extremely well known science fiction writer, probably the most important science fiction writer, American science fiction writer of the last 50 years. And actually, the first bit of science fiction I probably remember seeing as a young child, Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, was a Twilight Zone episode, which was also written by um, Philip K. Dick, PKD, and several films. Blade Runner was based on his work. He never really succeeded that greatly whilst he was alive. Blade Runner was turned into film the year he died. He died quite young at 53, but his output was massive. I mean, he wrote something like, I don't know, 144 stories, so many short stories, episodes of The Twilight Zone, and everything else. And he probably is the most important of the American science fiction writers. American science fiction had more of a, well, less of a grand tradition. You know, it was magazines and comics and everything, whereas in the UK you had H.G. Wells and other writers in the 1800s who really, were birthing science fiction. Nonetheless, he may have not been in the original run, but he was brilliant. I mean, I've read a lot of his stuff before and really enjoyed it. And this is actually the first one of his novels that was accepted, apparently, during his lifetime. And it's not like his other stories. His other stories, I think, they're more fast-paced, they're more intense, um, they, they're more extreme almost. Whereas this looks more at the human psyche. It looks more at relationships. It's kind of pseudo-historical because it's a novel based on the idea that the Second World War was won by Germany, and America has been divided between Germany and Japan with a little buffer zone in the middle, um, where all the Americans live. And the Americans, the white Americans, are lower class citizens. They're ruled by the Japanese and the Germans, depending on where they are. All the poor people are Americans, but then the Germans obviously are rich, the Japanese are rich. So it's interesting because it looks at prejudices, racial prejudice. Obviously, if you've got an ethnocentric state like Germany who just wants to kill everybody who's not of them, not Aryan, then they're going to have high status. But what's really interesting is every single character in here, maybe with the exception of Frank Fink, who's an artist who's a blacksmith of sorts who makes jewelry, I guess. Everybody except him is racist. Um, but even Frank has his own prejudices because there's a scene where, is it Frank? I think it's Frank. He's going into a hotel and he can't possibly be seen carrying his own luggage because there are black people around and they should carry the luggage. And there's lots of complexities in the story like that. It deals with trust. Who can you trust? Who can't you trust? It deals with surveillance. You've got the Nazis overseeing everything, and if you step out of line, it deals with identity. So there's Frank Fink pretending he's not Jewish when he actually is, and at one point he's picked up by the Nazis because he gets found out as a Jew and he's terrified that he'll be exterminated. And then you've got all of Africa has been eliminated. They've done the Nazis have basically killed all the Africans and it's just a wasteland. Um, so it's quite, when I speak about it now, it's quite a terrifying story, but I didn't enjoy it as much as his other stuff. The reason I didn't enjoy it is because it deals with so many themes at once, and something to carry that off has to be really, really well written. And one of the things that Philip K. Dick does here is a lot of the narrative is written in kind of broken English because the people are ruled by the Japanese, so their thoughts are expressed how a Japanese person might speak English. It's or a stereotype of that. So it's not a sentence here might be I picked up my glass to take a drink, whereas in here it might be expressed as man picked up glass for drink to take, silly stuff like that, which just makes it less easy to read. So there's all these grand ideas and all these double takes and everything, but they're coming with language that's difficult to understand. So that made it less enjoyable, I think. Now I'm discussing it. The themes in it are various and very interesting. Um, and I think to understand the themes, you need to understand a bit more, know a bit more about the writer. So he apparently sometimes wrote for 16 hours a day, which is, I think, a manic behavior. He took amphetamines, he took all kinds of drugs, especially in the 60s and 70s, wrote about how they affected his writing. He suffered from paranoia himself. He was not mentally stable. He had 5 marriages, so a lot of his relationships broke down. He was born a twin, but his sister died when they were young, and for that he apparently blamed his mother because he guessed that she'd neglected her. So he also had trust issues, and all of that comes through in the characters in this book. So you've got people who aren't sure what reality is. You've got people who aren't sure whether they believe in fate or not. There's a lot of consulting the I Ching in this, which is a ancient Chinese book of divination, and it's used by Japanese characters. And he points out that even that's not authentic. Everything about the Japanese, when I say he points out, characters, including the Japanese characters in the book, point out, is it authentic? Should I believe it? What is authenticity? So it's a philosophical book as well. Um, really interesting. I mean, I'm probably confusing everybody. Let's talk about some of the characters. So with Juliana, who is Frink's estranged wife, and she kind of represents the search for truth and the search for justice. During that search, she actually murders a man. She's a judo instructor who lives in the buffer zone. You've got, what's the chap's name? Joe Cinadella, who's a slop, so an Italian, a lower class citizen, and he has a chip on his shoulder. Actually turns out that he's not a slop at all. He's a Nazi sent to kill a writer. The writer is, gosh, what's his name? I'm forgetting the names now, but he's written a book called The Grasshopper is a passage from the Bible, and he's written a book of an alternative reality where America didn't lose the war, and so the Nazis aren't in charge. Then, you know, the Nazi leader dies and the struggle for power. Then there are people betraying Nazi secrets because they don't think that everybody should be killed. The Nazis are apparently planning to drop a mother load of atomic bombs on the home islands and wipe out all the Japanese so they can have absolute control. Then there's infighting within the Nazis. Then there's consulting the I Ching to see what's real and what isn't real. And then there's questioning if there's any meaning to life. So there's a Japanese character, Mr. Tagomi, who, after shooting some Nazis who storm his office, he starts questioning his own morality, and then he doesn't go to the office the next day, although he's always been to the office. And then he asks the I Ching, and the I Ching gives him answers and says, "What difference does it make anyway? We're all going to die in the end. So what's the point of knowing? What's the point of being good?" And then there's a huge twist at the end of the story, which talks about, I guess, the question that poses. I won't spoil it by telling you what the huge twist is. I guess the question that poses is whether good or evil wins. Does evil always prevail? So, very interesting book, and maybe if I could be bothered to give it a second reading, I'd enjoy it more because it's deep. There's lots of layers, and I've spent a day or two thinking about it since I finished it. Widely celebrated as his best novel. I thoroughly disagree. I think it's definitely, of all his things I've read, the one with the most interesting themes, the one with the most complex themes. But complexity doesn't necessarily make good entertainment or good education even. This makes me think of all these books I read about philosophy that never made sense because the language was too high or the language was bad communication. Although in philosophy there are often terms you won't understand because a new distinction or a new way of thinking has been invented and it can't be described with existing words, so often they'll put together a lot of words that sound ridiculous together. There's obviously a lot to say about this book. I'll read you some of it from the back, for example, and some of the reviews, I guess. So this is a good one. The most brilliant science fiction mind on any planet. That's according to Rolling Stone. Philip K. Dick's acclaimed cult novel gives us a horrifying glimpse of an alternative world, one where the Allies have lost the Second World War. In this nightmare dystopia, the Nazis have taken over New York, the Japanese control California, and the African continent is virtually wiped out. In a neutral buffer zone that divides the rival superpowers in America lives the author of an underground bestseller. His book offers a new vision of reality, giving hope to the disenchanted. Can other better worlds really exist? Dick's finest book and one of the very best science fiction novels ever published. That's by Eric Brown, who wrote the introduction. Eric Brown is also a science fiction writer, from what I gather. A bit about the man himself. Philip K. Dick was born in Chicago in 1928, but lived most of his life in California, briefly attending the University of California at Berkeley in 1947. Among the most prolific and eccentric of science fiction writers, his works blend philosophical speculation with elements of the surreal and typically feature androids, drugs, and hallucinations. He was on a lot of drugs himself, and he probably hallucinated, I'm guessing. By the time of his death in 1982, he had written over 30 science fiction novels, 112 short stories, many of which have been adapted for film or television. Correction on my earlier mistakes there. His most famous books include Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, 1968, later the inspiration for the film Blade Runner, Ubik, 1969, and A Scanner Darkling, 1977. The Man in the High Castle, 1962, perhaps his most painstakingly constructed and chilling novel, won a Hugo Award in 1963. I don't strongly recommend this book simply because I didn't enjoy the style. I might not have actually finished reading it if I wasn't already a fan of his other books, and so I guess his other books and the reputation he has create a halo effect that made me keep going. I just don't think it's well written. But there you go. So I'm going to give it a 5 being an average book. It's better than average. I'll give it a 7 out of 10 just for all the themes and the complexity of it. It's quite clever. It asks a lot of interesting questions, and I'll probably upset a lot of people by saying that who think it's the greatest book on earth. Let's see what you think. Go and read it. Good book. Good introduction. Well, I think it's a bad introduction to his work. But maybe if you read this first and enjoy it, then you'll really enjoy his other stuff. Who knows?